Welcome to the Pastoral Thoughts Podcast. This is your host, Jack Young, and Brother Dave Cialini once again is with me in the office, and we are going to talk about just working with youth, working with the teens in your church, and hopefully we'll have some good ideas and some good thoughts, helpful thoughts today. And Brother Dave, why don't you start with your background, your testimony? You came to Heritage Baptist Church as a teenager from the world. Your parents didn't go to church. They started going intermittently to Heritage, and you somehow got hooked. You're still here today.
Yes, sir, and I do want to thank you for recognizing me as an expert youth worker.
Amen.
Glad to be here today
Amen.
to give my wisdom.
That's why we flew you in.
Yeah, definitely. We're both...
Learning.
Absolutely, and but Lord's been good and helped us throughout the years gain some wisdom here. God was working in my life, and I know if you've experienced Christ in your life, you can look back and see those times where He was pulling at you and drawing you to Himself, and we would go to Heritage very sporadically as maybe 8, 9, 10 years old, and then my dad was getting more and more committed to Christ, and the youth ministry at Heritage, was really a blessing, and the church had grown, and the youth ministry was really a substantial thing, and it's
a big part of the church, big youth group.
There was definitely organization, but the youth pastor there at the time was Brother Ridman, but when I started going there, the young people were a blessing to me. They made me feel welcomed and pulled me in to be a part of it.
I've used this illustration before from your background.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked about you behind your back from my pulpit. That when you first came the first time you came to Teen Fundamentalists, and they had a teen group during the choir, while the choir would practice on Sunday night, and the teens would get together. There's like 25 teens a lot of times. A Teen Fundamentalist on Sunday night. I think it started at, what time did it start, 4:30?
I think.
Or 5?
It was like an hour and a half before service.
Yeah, so
right during choir practice.
Yeah, so it would have been 4:30.
Yeah, something like that.
And so you said, it's always that first impression that you remember for the rest of your life. But you walked into that room, you didn't know anybody, and Glenn Hunt was there. He said, "Dave, come sit by me."
Yeah,
and like he actually really wanted you to sit by him.
I will never forget that as long as I live. I mean, that was huge. To me, and walking into a youth group that was established and feeling, and if you know my personality, to feel invited was a big deal to me. And I wasn't the most popular kid in public school, and I was at a crossroads in my life.
So to feel wanted and feel needed as a teenager, that was like the initial glue that you needed. Once you were in, you started growing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was certainly genuinely saved, and
we were taught that. We were taught that by Brother Redmond, of course, and then Tom Bish before him, who's now a pastor. And I think the church as a whole was a very welcoming church, and so we were taught even as teenagers, teen comes in and greet them, be nice to them, be kind to them, which that's something that is taught. That is not something that comes natural.
No, not at all. And it has to be continually taught and continually emphasized, because teenagers can be the worst. Of course, they take after their parents, but they can be the worst at bringing people in and making other young people, because we teach our young people, we yell at our kids if they hang around the wrong crowd, right? And
then the wrong crowd shows up.
Yeah, what do I do? Am I supposed to be nice to this person? Should I talk to
them? The first time I ever saw Dave, I was really jealous, actually, because my parents would never let me do this. He had a mullet, man. It was pretty kicking.
Yeah,
I still think that he should have kept the mullet, but yeah, I mean, none of us had a mullet. We all went to Christian school, man. We had a hair check day.
Yeah,
and So again, your parents say, "Don't hang around the wrong crowd," but then somebody comes in with a mullet, and what do were you supposed to do? Snub them?
Yeah. So can I be nice to him? Can I talk to him? Yeah.
Yeah.
But don't get too close. Don't be it's like it can be a hard thing for a teenager that wants to please their parent but wants to please the Lord. And I know that
and it's that balancing act that even adults have a hard time with, because we're not supposed to be friends with the world, but Jesus was a friend of sinners. So where do we strike the balance? And we can we could tell you're not supposed to yoke up with sinners. And if I'm going to be a quote unquote friend to a sinner, in the sense that Jesus was a friend to a sinner, I'm going to have an agenda every time I get with them, and that is going to be to win them to Christ.
Yes.
And so, you have to, and you teach you're supposed to teach your young people to be soul winners. And what better place to go soul winning than when somebody comes into your youth group?
Yeah, and what other opportunity really do teenagers have to win others to Christ? Because it can be difficult for them to win adults, but their peers is an open door for them, and they often, and I think most of the time, potentially have a greater chance of winning other teens than even us. So,
and you, 'cause I remember you as a teenager when you first started coming, that you were asking my dad if you could go to the Christian school, and I remember him saying to you, let's do it next year. And, I think he was just kind of pausing and waiting. You remember that?
I do not remember that.
Yeah, because you wanted to go to the Christian school. But there was, because people were friendly and kind, and you got saved, and then, you wanted to live for the Lord. You wanted to go to Christian school, and you were drawn in. So that's a very powerful thing.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we've got some philosophical points and maybe some practical points in here in working with youth. Obviously, the ministry is a ministry, and we're all still trying to figure things out. But the first one that I have on my list, and Dave's got, looks like Joe Biden. He's got so many notes. They're not letting me say that or whatever. So the first point I have is love. And, the Bible says so much about love. Love covers a multitude of sins. You can hang the whole Bible on love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. Everything falls into place. But if you're working with youth, you're working with teenagers, you don't have to have some sort of big rule book, guidebook. You don't have to have a manual 10,000 pages deep. If you remember this and keep this in the forefront of your mind, is that you're supposed to love those kids. So I've got a verse, and that is 1 Thessalonians 2, well, actually 2 verses 7 and 8. It says, "But we were gentle among you, even as a nurse cherisheth her children, so being affectionately desirous of you, that we were willing to have imparted unto you, not the gospel of God only, but also our own souls, because you were dear unto us." So I think working with youth, no matter if you only have one teenager in your church or you have 100 teenagers in your church, if you work in that youth group, that if you're going to love them, it's going to be manifested first and foremost in prayer. And it's so much more important to talk to God about people than to talk to people about God. So you're going to pray for them individually. You're going to pray for their needs, pray for their person. And here in our verse, it talks about how this love is manifested in prayer, gentleness, patience, and also fidelity, faithfulness. And that's really the key. A lot of times you look at a youth leader and you think you're supposed to be the coolest guy in the whole room. Teenagers, I don't think, care that much about that at all. They care whether or not you care about them.
Yeah, it's cliche, but people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And it's so true with teenagers. The greatest of these is charity or love. And that's just something you always have to ask yourself. Am I loving these people?
And they're in a difficult transitional stage in their life. There's got a lot of insecurities, and really adults act a lot worse than teenagers do, in my estimation.
I agree.
A lot more stupid than teenagers do. A lot of times teenagers get a bad rap, but they are in a difficult transitionary period in their life, and they really need people in their life, spiritual mentors that just care about them, that are very transparent with them, and very helpful, and they understand that they're unconditionally loved by their youth director and the women in the church and the men in the church that are working with them, that they're going to be there with them through all these different weird stages.
Yeah, and perception is reality. You may love them, but ask yourself the question, do they know I love them? They have to know. You have to find a way to, just beat that drum that they are unconditionally loved, and that because they see us as this perfect Christians or these, way down the road, and they
think adults have it all figured out,
and when they fail, they internalize that, and they feel like a failure, and they feel like they're hopeless. And I've situations that I've come to find out years later where young people just felt like they could never measure up, and they just gave up trying.
Mm-hmm.
And I take personal that I didn't do a good enough job trying to convince them that, hey, I'm a sinner too. I struggle too.
And that one teenager that never reciprocates your love, that always blows you off, acts like he doesn't like you or she doesn't like you or whatever. Even if you took, let's say you had them in your teen department for 6 or 7 years, whatever, they started when they were 12 and then done when they're 18, 19 years old. But you showed them unconditional love the whole time, and you showed them that even though they're giving you the cold shoulder, and a lot of times they're just testing you out, that will make an impact on them. Even if they moved away or went away, they're always going to remember.
Yeah. They'll have that aha
what
moment,
you've been given.
like we did when we got a certain age and we had our kids, and we're like, "Wow,
oh, that's why mom and dad did that." Oh, okay. Yeah. And so it's never wrong to love someone with godly love. Love. The next thing I have on my list is vision. So with young people, see, with pastors, I'd rather be guilty of giving someone the benefit of the doubt or seeing the best in somebody. It's one thing if you're a cop. You know how a cop walks up to your car and he's looking up and down, and then he's talking, well, hello, Mr. Young. We in a hurry? And so he's looking at me. He's thinking, man, this guy's probably on drugs or whatever. He's looking for the worst.
Yeah.
And as believers, we're supposed to be doing the exact opposite. So you get some rebel, some reprobate, you think, man, God could really use him or her if God got a hold of their heart. Or we see somebody, what would be nice is get a time machine and go back, to when you were that person's age and see what a loser you were at that particular time,
Yeah.
And so you look at somebody, they don't seem to have anything together, and they're just a mess. But I think that you look at everybody and you see the God possible.
Yes.
In their life.
Who was that? There's that illustration of the individual that would stand before their class every day and bow before the class, and they would say, "Why do you do that?" He says, "I know not what great man sits before me." And I think like Martin Luther or something was one of those kids. And you do have to see not what they are, but what they could become.
Yes, and if you only have a couple of teenagers in your teen group or what, man, those are two precious souls.
Oh, yes.
I've heard the story about Robert Moffat and his pastor resigning because they only had one conversion last year, and it was Bobby Moffat.
Yep.
Only Bobby Moffat was saved last year. One of the greatest missionaries of all time. And so, we look at the God possible, and then I think all of the kids too, you look at them not just at the stage that they're at, but you look at their whole life. So you look at, here you're teaching someone who's going to be a mother, a father, a leader in the community, a grandparent someday. And so you're ministering to somebody who has all this potential out into the future. And so, the investment is going to be very, very important.
We just had a missions conference at our church. One of the missionaries is Brother Josh Schwarga, who's going to New Zealand. His dad was reached by the bus ministry, and he became a pastor. And now his son is going to the mission field.
Yeah.
And so, when you see that bus teen come in and you're like, I hope
he'll be in
doesn't
jail
draw
in
on
a
the
couple years.
Yeah, I mean, somebody has to believe that God can do an amazing work in someone's life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I look back at the people who had the most influence in my life, and I think of two different men. One of the fellows' name is Troy Freeman, and then also Jim Willoughby. And they were Jim Willoughby was the 11th grade teacher for boys in Oklahoma City, and I remember him just being sincere layman. I couldn't tell you one single Sunday school lesson that he ever taught us, but I knew that he cared about every one of us. And that was like even more important. That was like the most important lesson. Then also Troy Freeman. I remember every single Sunday, Troy Freeman bringing us, it was chocolate milk and it was a little bit icy. And he had this time like in Sunday morning where he would put the chocolate milk into the freezer so it would be a little bit icy for us. I mean, he didn't have to do that, but every single Sunday morning, he showed that kind of care to the boys. And both these men, they were both laymen in the church. Neither one of them were, full-time Christian service. They didn't have a title or anything, but they showed us how much they cared. Looking back on the influences of my life, I'd have to say, the faithful men and women of God in the church really had just amazing, profound impact upon my life. They treated me like I was important.
That goes right back to your first point of love. Mm-hmm. I mean, why did they do that? Love. Mm-hmm. And so that just gives them that commitment to unconditionally do those things for you.
Yes.
Or love is felt, the message is heard.
That's right. That's right. And so another thing I thought under vision is that remember that these are little adults and they're becoming big adults. They're gradually becoming adults and they're gradually going into adulthood. And so really what parenting is you are giving the youngster more and more responsibility. One of the definitions of character is parenting yourself, right? And so you're giving them more and more responsibility. So most young people, here's a quote here. 2 reasons that teenagers don't stay in church. Number 1, they don't know what they believe. Number 2, they don't have a place to serve. And so they're gradually becoming independent. So one of my thoughts is this, is that all the teenagers should have some sort of responsibility inside their local New Testament church and serving in some sort of capacity. And so we're treating them like adults. We're entrusting to them some form of service. Whether it's sewing, a bus route, or young ladies working in the nursery. We have an Awana program here that some of the teenagers can get involved in. Also special music and singing, whether your church has some sort of a teen night. We've got a couple young men here that believe the Lord wants them to be preachers, and so we give them a platform to preach and to flex those muscles and try out those skills. And so as part of vision is that I'm going to be replacing myself. And so, as Paul said to Timothy, what thou hast heard among me, among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. He also said to young Timothy, he said, let no man despise thy youth. So you think of what Paul did with Timothy is that he took a young man, people believe he's about 19 years old, and Titus was also a teenager at the time. So the great apostle took these young men, and instead of just acting like he was better than them or greater than them, he humbled himself and he really replaced them with himself. He says to the Corinthian church, he says, didn't Titus walk in my own steps? Wasn't he a chip off the old block?
Yeah.
So, Titus would get up and preach, be like, oh, I know who trained him. It was Paul. He preaches like Paul. And so you're really, you're raising up, you realize you're raising up your replacements there with the teen group.
Yeah, I think sometimes we have to make sure we're not insecure in that, and we have to realize that, we are only successful as we train others around us, and we are all interim pastors in a sense.
That's right.
And
we all have term limits.
Yeah, exactly.
We're all checking out of here at some point.
So, I put it this way when I'm talking to the young people, we're training you to not need us anymore. Right. That's really the ultimate goal.
And that's the goal of every Christian parent.
Yeah.
Is you go from milk to meat.
Yep.
And you can stand on your own 2 spiritual legs.
We don't like that when they become independent in a sense, but that's really, we need to get them to that point where they can stand without us.
Well, and you see different styles of parenting. You see different styles of ministry as well. And there is that authoritarian style where, well, you will do what I say. You stand over. Well, that doesn't do very good when you have not trained those youngsters to think on their own, to know what they believe, have their own personal convictions about stuff, and then also have had space to grow, which also one of the things we have to do is let these youngsters make mistakes. And they got to realize that mistakes are normal. Sometimes I feel like teenagers, I mean, you grew up in a youth group and we go to preaching. Sometimes they just get ripped on by the preacher or whatever. And the funny thing is a teenager makes a mistake, and sometimes an atom bomb is used to correct them, where if this adult made that same mistake or 10 times worse, everyone would show the adult grace. Where you think, how do you expect a 15-year-old to be a spiritual giant? How long did it take you to? I am not spiritually mature. I have not arrived yet. And, I'm 42 years old.
Well, and I think that's also, it demonstrates to me the insecurity of the leader, because he can take advantage of a situation. Oh, that's a kid.
We can control him.
He has the authority. He can come down, but this other guy, he's going to tiptoe around because he's afraid he's going to offend him. It's not an effort to be gracious. It's because of his own lack of courage and lack of wisdom in dealing with people. Yeah,
absolutely. So again, it goes back to vision. So treat them with dignity and respect. I want all the young people here. Unfortunately, right now, we've got a wonderful teen group. We've got wonderful teens. I give credit to God, parents, Brother Jonathan, who couldn't be here today. He was invited, but he thinks he has to work, and he couldn't get off this afternoon. I give him credit. I'm way down there.
You're
on the
definitely
list.
not reaping what you sowed.
That's the truth. I'm just bracing myself.
I grew up in the youth group with Brother Jack.
Yeah. That is the truth. And I was I was a reprobate. And
it was a thorn in the flesh.
I was a messenger of Satan to buffet. Literally, man, and not figurative language. Bam, bam. No. But we were buddies. But I wasn't the good friend. I was the little red guy that sits on one shoulder, and so anyway, my mother always said, "You're going to get a child just like you when you get to be an adulthood." And I always thought, and I never said this, but I always thought it. I thought, well, what did you do?
Yeah,
to get me right.
Exactly.
So God has not rewarded me according to my iniquity, and so we do have a bunch of good teenagers right now. I'm very, very thankful for that. Here's another thing too, and this was Brother Alette said this, and I think he said it a couple times when he was with us, and I thought, man, I want to use that. I'm going to steal that and use that with our young people, and that was this, talking about vision about the future. It's terrible when you're like 12th grade and everybody under the sun. Now, you knew what you wanted to do. You wanted to be a preacher and go out to Bible college. But most 12th graders have no clue on earth. So he was asking, Brother Alette was asking my kids, like, so what do you want to do when you grow up? And, Timmy wants to be a sniper and kill bad guys. He's 11 years old, He says, you know what you need to say? If somebody asks you what you want to do, I want to do God's will for my life. That's what I want to do. Whatever God's will is, that's what I want to do. And that's a good thing to train the teenagers in as well. Being a teen is a scary time because you feel so awkward. There's so many insecurities. You're just certain that you're going to be on Skid Row when you get adulthood. And so it's important for young people to say, God has whatever vocation, whatever calling, whatever spouse, and all you want for your life in the future is to do God's will, whatever that might be. That's another thing about the vision.
Yeah, that's important. I mean, young people give so much credibility to I've just seen what you're talking about happen so many times. And it's almost like an adult will come condescendingly and never made in a moment of investment, hadn't spent a minute at a youth activity, haven't done anything to be sacrificial to show the kid love. And now it's almost like that question to the teenager is a judgment.
Yes.
So what are you going to do? And it's like, my encouragement to you, if you haven't spent years investing in a young person, don't ask them that question because they're just going to see it as a judgment, because if they don't know what they're doing, that's how they're going to feel. And I just encourage them to let them know that you care about them. If there's anything you can do for them, I'd be glad to help. You're praying for them, and just let God work it out organically in their life.
Yeah, they're under plenty of pressure without you asking that. and they ought to understand is, youth leader, youth director, and they have so many thoughts about the future when you're in their teenage years, is listen, just be surrendered to the will of the Lord. The Lord's not going to show you many times what's going to be on tomorrow calendar. As long as you have a surrendered heart to the Lord and do what the Lord wants you to do, you're going to be happy all your life. You're going to have the joy of the Lord all your life. Yeah.
I'd like to interject something. When I first got into youth ministry, and the Lord's blessed me with the opportunity to serve young people for the last, basically, I'd say about 15 years, I've had a title. And God gave me a verse that kind of kept things always in perspective to me, because I had experienced some imbalanced leadership at times upon me. And I didn't want that to happen, and God gave me Proverbs 16:6, which says, "By mercy and truth, iniquity is purged." And so I see that mercy and truth, that balance. And when you work with people, any kind of people, but we're speaking about young people, I always want God to help me to remember to have that balance. Jesus was filled with grace and truth, and to have both. You mentioned love, to certainly not be afraid to tell it the way it is, but to speak the truth in love. They need to know that you love them. And so having that, and then also on top of that, it says at the second part of that verse, "And by the fear of the Lord, men depart from evil."
Yeah.
So I didn't want young people to do what I wanted them to do, and I wanted them to do what God wanted them to do. I didn't want to leverage my position or my influence in such a way that, I was building my own little kingdom, but that they would become God worshipers. And so the Lord helped me to understand in time that as much as I want these young people to change, I can manipulate change temporarily.
Amen.
Or I can have God work in their life.
Right.
And so it became my effort and my intense desire to...
Because young people are used to, like, no young kid wants to stand out. And so you kind of do what your peers do just because you don't want to look like a nerd or a dork or, And so if you can create an atmosphere inside your youth group if you have the certain levers, the certain controls, especially if you've got like a Christian school and a youth group or whatever, where you can get everybody, you can have uniformity.
Absolutely.
And everyone can be like you. I mean, I went to school like that.
And as a youth,
and I will not get into the details, but it was like the principal liked hockey, like the new principal liked hockey. So then because he was so, top down, everybody started liking hockey.
Yeah.
And it was like, it was very uniformity, authoritarianism. And let me tell you something, once everybody hit 12th grade, they were gone. And so, you don't want uniformity. I like a word that you use in there, and I know you're ready to say something, but you said, I want to create worshipers of God. And something that's really helped me is from John chapter number 4. So Jesus goes out and finds this harlot, goes across the tracks in Samaria, which is like forbidden ground. I mean, they didn't even want to, the Jews would walk through Samaria. They'd like get all the dust off of it because they didn't want any dust from Samaria in, Jewish ground. So he goes, finds this woman. It's like a harlot living with some guy. Why? Because God the Father seeketh such to worship him. And so I think the ultimate goal as a pastor will be the same as a youth director. If you can get these kids to love and worship God on their own, you have you get A++.
Yeah. So that environment you're talking about, that uniformity, as a youth pastor or even a parent, we can rest in that, and I've made this mistake in youth ministry where just because it looked like everything was okay, I felt like it was okay. You have a young person make a good decision, and outwardly everything seems to be fine, but you don't cultivate that.
Right.
You don't follow up on it. You don't keep beating that drum. And so in time I learned I can't just think everything's okay. I've got to make sure these kids are continually going to God. So instead of making an effort to get them to me, I made the effort to get them to God.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think sometimes in our ministry, we may not say it this way, but we act like it depends more on me than it does on God.
And also, if you have a very structured and an authoritarian structure, the people in that structure think that they're safe because they've followed all the rules. And the majority of people are not rebels like myself. The majority of people are upholders, and they want to uphold the rules of the culture in which they find themselves in. And so if these young people, they don't smoke, they don't chew, they don't date the girls that do, and they're plugged in the youth group, and they're going to church all the X number of times a week, and things along this nature, they think they're okay. But the truth is, there can be a big void inside. They're really not seeking God with their heart, and they have not cultured, they're not developed a heart relationship with God. And so when that structure's taken out of the way, when they hit 18, 19, 20, they fall apart. And we wonder what happened. They were so good. They were one of the best kids we had in the youth group. Now they're like a very good, now they're following society's rules.
Right.
Before they were following yours, now they're out in society, and they're following the world's rules.
Yeah. I remember an influential mother early on, after a few years, and it was a situation where they were talking about putting these teenagers to work. And let's put them to work, and they need to work because that'll give them an identity. And I'm like, that is so wrong. You don't find your identity in what you do. You find your identity in who you are, and you do what you do because of who you are.
Right.
And so the root of that statement was so, in my opinion, was harmful. I didn't go after the person, but I was just so distraught by that philosophy, and it just hit me at that moment. That's wrong. We've got to cultivate a relationship with God first. And certainly I get what they were saying.
Yes.
But it's got to start here first.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's part of the challenge, and that's what that's one of down on my line, because one of the ways, again, when it goes back to the good teens that are in our youth group, and we'll see how they all turn out. We got some good ones, and I really think they do have a heart relationship with the Lord. But again, I give credit to God.
Amen. Parents
number 2, because really I think, and you understand this, there's a few outliers. I think that in your own background, that you might have been the most spiritual person in your home, or the most driven for church and the things of God in your teen years. And so your parents were not dragging you to church. Let's say that. You were like, hey, what, can you take me to this special?
If my parents weren't going to church, I was calling somebody to get a ride.
Right. So you did. You had that. But with parents, I think for the most part you were an outlier. But the general rule is all a youth department can do is complement the home. It cannot replace the home, and we've seen that too. Back in the 1980s, there was a Christian school movement. If your church is running 50, when are you starting your school? And everybody started Christian school. And so there's a tendency with the parents to outsource all the religious training to the church. So I bring them to church 6 days or 7 days a week. I mean, if you count some stuff's going on Saturday, and so you think, Brother Cialini, he's taking care of my kids spiritually, and all the rest of the good folks there at the school and everything. And then the spiritual parents, again, have kind of outsourced their own spiritual responsibility. So I think that part of the help that you can think of, not to blame parents for anything, but actually somehow I think there's a challenge with the youth director to communicate with the parents and really get them involved in the kids' training somehow. Any ideas about that?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and I completely agree with that idea that as a youth pastor, you have, when you are working with other people's kids, these are not your kids. Mm-hmm. And some people might think otherwise, and I would not agree with that.
Right, me neither.
And so I think you have to respect their parents. Mm-hmm. You have to be transparent with their parents.
And never speak evil about a kid's parents.
Absolutely not. I've
respect their authority.
Yeah, and you want to part of your ministry is to help them be the child that parent needs them to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about getting them on your bandwagon, but getting them, I mean, if you as a youth pastor get them on your bandwagon, but not their parents' bandwagon, that's a failure, in my opinion. Their hero ought to be their dad and mom,
mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I know not all moms and dads are exactly what they ought to be, but, you know, that's a part of ministry as well, that you're teaching people to find the things to be grateful for, find reasons to, you know, follow, be obedient, honor, show love, even though the leadership may not always be what it ought to be. That's life,
mm-hmm.
you know,
mm-hmm.
and, follow as we follow Christ. That being said, and that would be the model. And, you know, God's blessed me with some great parents. But sometimes in today's day and age, you do have young people that come from difficult situations.
Yes, absolutely.
And you have to be careful, but you do have to realize that some young people need you to be a dad or a mom.
And particularly a model, a mentor,
Mm-hmm.
a figure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of young ladies in the youth department that they don't know how to be a wife.
Mm-hmm.
They might not even know how to be a mother, depending on their broken background. But the other ladies in the church they're going to have to look up to. You know, they're going to have to be tight as two women around there. And you're going to be a mentor and a role model. And I think that's why the most important thing you can do if you work with youth is fidelity, faithfulness. I remember when I first started bus route in Oklahoma City, bus route 12 with Brother Don. And Brother Don had been working on the bus route for years. He worked for the FAA, air traffic control, and had a very good job. His wife owned a bunch of subways, but every single weekend it was bus route, bus 12. And that's what he did. And so I started 23 years old, and I thought I had to like goof off with the kids. I didn't know how to interact with the kids. There wasn't that many bus workers. And I remember him telling me, probably about second, third week, he said, Jack, let me tell you something. He said, you don't have to be cool with these kids. He says, you don't have to feel like you got to play around with them. He says, just the very fact that you're faithfully showing up their door every Saturday and Sunday, that is going to mean the most to them.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we're going into broken homes and neighborhoods where, mom was high on crack and, dad, I didn't know, I hadn't seen him in years. But what spoke volumes to these young people is that every single weekend, like clockwork, you're stopping by their house, seeing if they're going to come the next day. The next day you're there, smile on your face. Good to see you today. And how you doing? And so I think it's the same way, in the youth, just that fidelity, faithfulness to God, faithfulness to the ministry, faithfulness to church is really where it's going to be at with the youth, which I think also you ought to think of your youth department not as the people that you have now. I think one of the great blessings of being like a youth pastor for 15 years in the same place is now you see some of your teen department, they're out there serving the Lord, they're getting married, having kids, and they're really still your teens. And it's like Brother Harris, he's a big fan of this podcast, by the way, so shout out to him.
Hey, Brother Harris.
So every time I see him, he'd be like, he's like, I'll take credit for all the good that you do. You were in my class in second grade, and like I'll give you all the credit for the good and the bad. But yeah, so those people are that are in your teen group. You're not just training that for that 7-year window or 6-year window. That's going to be for their whole life.
Yeah, I echo what you said about not having to be that cool guy.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not the coolest guy in the world. And to a young person, just being there faithfully. Mm-hmm. I felt a long time ago that it was important for my wife and I both to do our best to try to model a family to these kids, because I felt like as a young person, me growing up, I wanted to have a good family. Mm-hmm. I wanted to have a good marriage. Mm-hmm. And so I tried to be able to be approachable, to be touchable. And we do a lot of things activity-wise for kids. And I remember asking one of our teenagers, what's your favorite activity? What's your favorite thing we do? She said, I like the best when you have us over to your house.
Wow.
And it's just like we do some things where we invite them over, and it's not like super organized, somewhat casual fellowship. And
It's like hanging out.
Yeah, but my wife has never preached a sermon. She's not a preacher or teacher, but I think she's impacted the girls better than I've impacted the boys.
Right.
And they just love her, and she's so approachable, and she's real. I mean, my wife she's too real sometimes about, her faults and failings.
Well, I would say that with teenagers as well. Teenagers really appreciate transparency. I can win teenagers over like really fast if I start telling them about my own foibles. I'm not saying it's like you have to be a confessional booth in order to preach to, but if you make fun of yourself or tell them like a little bit about the struggle. I could say, when I was 15 years old, I had acne all over my face and I hated it. My mother took me into a dermatologist. He gave me this drug called Accutane, which is off the market today. And so it did, you know what it did? It got rid of my acne, but also it dried out my skin so bad I could go like this and it would be like it was snowing. There'd be so much flakes of skin. I got oily skin. Yeah. Even today, man, see how nice this forehead shines?
Yeah.
But another thing it did? When I was like 15, 16 years old, it made me start going bald, which is another side effect. And so early on, like 11th grade, people would be like, you're going bald. And so way before my time, I'm sure I would have been bald anyway, I started going bald.
Interesting.
And so I went from having bad acne to going bald, which was even worse. And so, if you tell your teenagers stuff like that, they'd be like, because it's like sometimes they think, oh, pastor, is so cool. I never had it. Like, no, that's not. And so the transparency and the honesty, and down to earth saying, hey, what your struggles you're going through, that's normal. That's part of, unfortunately, that's part of the world process. Transparency, honesty. So you're talking about activities. Let me ask you this, because this is important. I remember back, man, when Heritage had a very large youth group with us, and I think right before the time that you came, we used to have an activity every single Friday. And the idea was, it was a great idea, but the idea was like, on Friday nights, instead of the kids hanging out with, bad friends or whatever, they could hang out at church, and, that's where the activity can be at, which really, my dad and others decided, that's probably too much. They probably need to be at home with their family and interacting that way. And, having a bunch of teenagers hang out together all the time is probably not the best thing in the world. Kind of like, you call a bunch of blondes in a row a wind tunnel. Joke, all you blondes out there. But anyway, it's a bunch of teens hanging, and I had to say, like, during that, when we had all those activities, the teen group wasn't at a pinnacle spiritually. I have to admit. So what is the goal of teen activities, teen functions?
So I think you look at, you got teen activity versus youth ministry. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, it's a teen activity. We call it a teen activity, but the purpose is discipleship, ultimately. The purpose is making disciples of Jesus Christ. And so, yes, we provide an activity in a clean environment, and they can be around mentors. They can be out of the influence of the world. But we, provide opportunities to be balanced and to hear preaching and teaching the Word of God. And I have an opportunity as a teacher to build upon lessons so I can kind of present them with a balanced menu of spiritual truth as I, grow them through that 6-7 year period of their teen years. And no, we don't do it every Friday night. And, some that maybe that's the way the Lord leads your church to do it. Right. But I just felt like, and there's many reasons why you could say no, but I felt like as I mentioned before, respecting the other parents. In churches like ours, there's a lot going on. And I just didn't feel like I could take every Friday night away from the family. If they're at home having family devotions, or if they're at home watching a movie, I don't know. But I just didn't feel like I could take every Friday night away because life is busy.
What we do here is probably about once a month we'll have a teen activity. And I really think that's sufficient because our teens work around here in different areas. We'll have teens that come out sewing on Saturday. We might have like a different event that they're going to, youth conference, somebody else's, and then all the different services here that they're involved in. And we really, at this point for our church and our group, we think, once a month is good. And then I like what you said, that there's a difference between a teen activity and a youth ministry. And what we do here is, Brother Jonathan, every time we have a youth event, a youth activity, youth ministry, he has a full 15, 20-minute devotional / sermon at the end, and it's very helpful for the kids. I say to our church, I've said this a bunch of times, and it's one of those things that I'll repeat till, I either forget about the phrase or I'm dead or whatever. But Christian fellowship is not a bunch of Christians doing an activity. Christian fellowship is when people get together and talk about the Lord. So yeah, we're going to go to ball games, we're going to go whitewater rafting, and we're going to go to all sorts of crazy activities, but it's not Christian fellowship unless people are together, Christians are together, talking about the Lord. So
let me add this about activities. You have to remember that every young person isn't like you, and it's important to be balanced in what you do. Not every kid's an athlete. Some kids are scared to death to come and play a sport.
They're going to look foolish.
Yeah. I mean, remember, we're talking about teenagers, very insecure, and we want to help them become well-rounded, and sports are good for kids, but we also want them to be academic. We also want them to be creative. We also want them to be, if I can use the word, cultured. So there's a lot of things we could do to help build the young people, because that's what we're trying to do, whether it be doing work, going soul winning, teaching music, playing games, that's academic. Getting sweaty, running around, bumping into each other, those are just, try to be balanced, because it can be easy to get in a rut and, okay, we're just going to play dodgeball every week. And then you get this kid, you're going to lose him because
he doesn't like dodgeball, and he's not good at throwing a ball. And and he just looks foolish every time. He's the first guy out, last person picked for the team.
I mean, you got a girl, just came out of 6th grade, just entered the youth group, and then you got this senior guy
whipping a ball at her. She's having a lot of fun.
Or any, think of any game. I mean, how intimidating is that? You remember as a 7th grader playing soccer with a senior. I mean, you're like, so, you just got to be sensitive, of all the young people, and think of those things.
This is the last thing that I have on my list here is connect them. Sometimes the teen department can be its own entity and separate from the church. It's like a church within the church. And you want to make sure that they are a part of the church and not separate away from it. There's always that challenge there, especially some churches. And I mean, again, you do what's best for your church, but I really think that teenagers ought to be in adult church, especially on Sunday morning. Now, we do have a teen group that meets on Wednesday night, and then, of course, we have teen Sunday school or teen small group on Sunday morning, so they do have their own special time with their own special teachers, but we want to integrate them into the church family. And here's the thing. So we just came from the Senior Saints Fellowship, and the seniors need the teenagers, and the teenagers need the seniors. And then also the juniors in the church, the youngsters in elementary, they need the teenagers, and so do the adults. And so the church is a community. So we gotta make sure that those teens don't feel like their own separate entity. And then a lot of times we try to build a big teen group by just having an entertainment time, and all you do is entertain kids. Well, as soon as they hit 18, all of a sudden they have to be an adult, and you were supposed to be training them and giving them more and more responsibility so that they're a full-blown adult, 18, 19, not like you're not going to have young adult activities or anything, but they're going to take on more spiritual responsibility into adulthood. One of the things we're doing is Brother Tom Stiles, who heads up our seniors ministry, he came up with this idea Wednesday. I thought it was absolutely great. He said, I want to tie in the teens with Silver Saints, and I want to have an activity where we serve them ice cream, and then also I wanted to get their names so the seniors can pray for the teenagers. Thought, man, it is awesome. That is awesome. And so he's going to coordinate with Brother Jonathan, and they're going to, work that out so that the teenagers are connected to the seniors, and the seniors are connected to the teenagers, and we're really knitting them into the church.
That's a great idea, because so many times the older people, they feel like they get to a point, they feel like they're put on the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
What can I do besides show up and listen?
Mm-hmm.
And and now to be able to feel connected to someone, it just puts life into them.
Yeah, and really the sad thing about our society is a lot of these age groups that, a lot of families used to have grandma and grandpa living underneath their roof, and kids grew up seeing all the stages of life, from birth all the way up until like right before death. And the wonderful thing about a church family is that you get to you learn so much from all the different life stages. I mean, it's a blessing for the seniors to see a child, and it breathes them new life. Mm-hmm. And so it's important for the teenagers not to be cut off from the rest of the church. And I would say this, that if you have a very dynamic youth leader who's a great, let's say, pastor, man, you still better find a way to connect the teens to their pastor. Mm-hmm. And so as soon as they're out of brother so-and-so's youth group, they don't drop off the map. Mm-hmm. So there's the connection.
Yeah, I agree. You can, if you're not careful, you compartmentalize your church too much, then you can get the tail wagging the dog. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So youth ministry especially is one that can happen too.
Yeah, absolutely. What else you got?
One thing the Lord's helped me with in the last couple of years really is I've come to the realization through maybe mistakes of my own, is that in ministry, preaching and teaching, it can't just be a monologue. You don't know what your young people are thinking if you're not listening to them. Mm-hmm. There's got to be times where young people ask questions. And we're living in a day and age where less and less can you just tell a young person, this is what we believe because I say so.
Yeah, we don't live in an authoritarian culture anymore.
So we can't have as goals to raise a bunch of yes men. Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong with having a critical mind in a sense, not a skeptical mind, but a critical mind that we're like the Bereans, and it's okay if our young people want to understand.
I think in the era that you and I grew up in, that they could have done a way better job. And again, it's easy to judge. I don't want to armchair quarterback, but they could have done a way better job at like asking us questions and getting feedback and allowing us to ask questions. Because I feel like I'm a questioner, mm-hmm. So I always had a lot of questions in my mind that I knew I couldn't ask, because they would get mad at me because I asked a question. No,
it's true. And we were, at times, you were scared to ask questions because it was almost taken like as a disrespect.
Right. Like, you don't trust us, or,
your best leaders, your future leaders
are going
to be questioners.
Yeah.
And so what you do is, or what we do is, we chase off our future because we're not willing to do our own homework, and being able to answer those questions. Why do we believe what we believe? Okay. Why isn't evolution true? Why, so there's a lot of skepticism out there. There's a lot of questioning, and we need to address those mm-hmm, things. Mm-hmm. We got to. We've got to listen to the kids, what they're going through, what they have questions about. And there's a lot of uncomfortable conversations, and sometimes you may be put in the spot and you might not know the answer at the time, but those young people need to know. Mm-hmm. And they got to feel comfortable being able to ask questions. We've got to cultivate a spirit. And I'm not talking about being disrespectful, but there's...
Well, and I think that has to do with the humility of the leader. Not that you disrespect your office or whatever, but you ought to, young people ought to feel that you are approachable. And like I had a young man it was great. It was at the youth activity, asked me about James chapter number 2. And we probably had a 20-minute conversation just about the Bible and doctrine and things like that. And I really appreciate the fact, number one, that I would never do that. I would have been too intimidated. I'm glad he's got that spirit to ask, and he asked in a learning manner. He just, what about this, and then what? And so it was a good dialogue. And so that young man is thinking, and he is forming his own opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And if I do truly believe that I know the truth and I have the truth, I shouldn't be afraid to get asked questions about it.
Yeah. A good verse for a youth pastor. The wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, what? Easy to be entreated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Easy to be entreated. And a young person should feel so free to be able to ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
Not be afraid that they're going to be thought of as disrespectful or questioning, or that they're going to be laughed at. So many times, and you've seen it, and us growing up, a leader would make a guy feel like a fool.
Give him some backhanded, insulting,
and I'm like,
answer. Yeah.
I feel bad for that person at the judgment seat of Christ.
Well, and the problem is, it might stem from that the leader does not know the answer, and he is weak in his faith. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, let's say you're first starting, you're a youth director, you hadn't been saved, or you don't know for very long, and you don't know the Bible very well, or whatever. Just say to the young person, let me write this down, and I'll get back to you. And then go talk to the pastor or somebody who knows, and find out the answer. And that young person will really respect you for that.
Absolutely, and I think it'll bring them in to realize, oh, you don't know everything too.
Yeah, and we can find answers for the hope that is within us.
Amen.
Yeah, amen. All right, are we done?
Certainly. We could go on for hours, but you got to end sometime.
Well, that was good, and I hope it was a blessing to those that listen. Thanks for being on today, Brother Dave, and go visit Dave at furtherance.media.com.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
All your track and brochure needs, your every door direct mail, your website. Some of you guys' websites look terrible. And the reason why you haven't had any visitors is because your website looks terrible. So go visit furtherance.media.com and have Brother Dave do that for you, and you'll be happy that you did. All right, that's your commercial. You owe me $5.
All right, thank you.
All right, God bless each and every one of you. Stay tuned. We got some more exciting podcasts coming up. Thank you so much today for watching this podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe to this channel. Also, if you'd like to reach out to us by way of email, you can email us at pastoralthoughtsmail@gmail.com. And if you'd like to, I do write a blog, and you can subscribe to that at pastorjack.org. Thank you, God bless you, and have a great day.